right, today I'm going to review a few of the skills that you need to work with fractions to be able to be really good at dividing them, as that's our 6th grade standard. So we're going to start with changing a mixed number into an improper fraction. And first I want to remind you that a mixed number is a fraction that has a whole number and a fractional component. And an improper fraction is a fraction whose numerator is greater than its denominator. So typically what we want to look at here is how many wholes do I have? I have 4 whole items. And each of those items are going to have 3 pieces because that's what a denominator tells me. The numerator of a fraction always tells me how many pieces I have. The denominator always tells me how many pieces I would need to make a whole. So let's take a look at what we typically do then. Well, if I have 4 wholes and each one has 3 pieces, when I multiply here, I'm going to get 12. That's how many pieces will be in those 4 wholes. Plus, I have an extra one. So that's where this 13 comes from. It's the 12 that I get from my whole shapes plus the 1 extra piece I have. And I still have a denominator of 3 because 3 still represents how many pieces make a whole. Let me show you this using a picture. So here we were converting 5 and 1/6 into an improper fraction. Well, if you look, those 5 wholes, each having 6 pieces. I'm just going to shade them in really fast. That's 3 wholes I'm finishing up, and a 4th one, a 4th whole pie, whole pizza, whole whatever you want to look at it. And here's my 5th. And in addition, I have 1 extra piece when I needed 6 to make a whole. So all in all, I have 6 times 5, because 5 wholes, each having 6 pieces. That's 30, plus the 1 extra piece that I have of this one, and that makes a grand total of 31/6. That's where that comes from. Okay, I'm going to do one example for you here. 3 and 1/2 is the same thing as 3 times 2 plus 1. So that's 6 plus 1, which is 7 halves. Because in those 3 wholes, if they each have 2 pieces, that makes 6 pieces, plus the 1 extra piece that I need to make this entire fraction. All right, now we can also convert those improper fractions back into mixed numbers. And we do that actually through long division, and we're going to talk about that in a second. In this particular case, I have 11 pieces, and I need 5 to make a whole. So we want to find out how many 5s go into 11. That tells me how many wholes I can make. So 5 goes into 11 twice. That's where this comes from. So I can make 2 whole pies. And if I do that, that's going to account for 10 pieces. I still have 1 piece left over, and that's where this goes. And I still need 5 to make another whole. Now you can do this using long division if you look. 5 goes into 11 twice, and when I subtract, I find that I have a remainder of 1, and that's 1/5 as a fraction. So let's do that using a picture. In this case, I have 22/5. So if you notice, each of these whole circles has been cut into 5 pieces because that's what it says here. I need 5 pieces to make a whole. I'm going to shade in 22. So that's 5, 10, 15, 20, 22. Well, if you notice, if each of these holes need 5 pieces, I was able to fill 4 holes. And when I was done, I had 2 pieces left over when I needed 5 to make an additional whole. And that's how you would convert that from an improper fraction into a mixed number. So, for example here, how many 7s go into 20? Let me just zoom in on that a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better. So how many 7s go into 20? We're going to take 20, divide it by 7. It actually goes in twice. And when I subtract, I get a 6. Well, I don't have anything else to divide by, so there's 6 pieces when I needed 7 to make another whole. And you don't necessarily have to set it up as a long division problem. You can ask yourself, how many 4s into 33? Well, if you know that 4 times 8 is 32, that would leave us with 1 extra piece when I needed 4 to make another whole. Okay? Now let's take a quick look at how we simplify fractions. So to simplify fractions, you need a common factor that is shared between the numerator and the denominator. Then you divide the numerator and the denominator by that common factor. You know you're done when the numerator and denominator only share a factor of 1. Okay? So for example here, we have 4/8. Okay, and I know that the picture's a little hard to see on here, but in their MSGs it should be a little clearer. But we have 4 pieces when I needed 8 to make a whole. The common factor between 4 and 8 is 2, so I'm going to divide both the top and the bottom by 2, leaving me with 2/4. But 2 and 4 still share a common factor of 2, so I'm going to keep simplifying until I get 1/2. And 1/2 is equivalent to all of these fractions. It's just the simplified version. And if you notice, all we did was make these, combine some of these pieces. And then we took these 2 and made them into 1. They occupy the same space in the circle. They're just broken down into different size pieces. So to simplify this, let me do a couple of these as samples here. Here, 5 and 15 share a factor of 5. So we're going to use that as our factor to divide by. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 15 divided by 5 is 3. 12 and 24 actually share a factor of 12. But just to show you that we can break it down a little differently, I'm going to divide by 3 first. When I do that, I'm going to get 4/8. And then I notice that there's still a factor of 4. So I'm going to be able to break it down even further, and that's 1/2. And doesn't that make sense? Because 12 is half of 24. So that relationship holds. We'll do one more here. 6 and 24 share a factor of 6. I'm going to get 1/4, and that is how we simplify fractions. All right, I've got one more review skill for you so that you can be a proficient divider when we start working on that in class, and that is how to multiply. So fractions, when you multiply them, don't forget that you can simplify before you multiply, and that's a really important concept. It helps you make those numbers a lot smaller at the start rather than having to make them smaller once you've blown them up as you multiply. So if you notice this example here, we started with 7/6 times 3/9. Somebody who was doing this problem recognized that 3 and 6, something from the top and something from the bottom, shared a common factor of 3. So 3 divided by 3 is the 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. When I do that, I look, and there's nothing in the top that shares any common factors with anything in the bottom other than the factor of 1. So now that this is all simplified, I know that my answer will be simplified as well, and I simply multiply across. 7 times 1 is 7, and 2 times 9 is 18. So let me show you a couple of examples here. I'm going to blow them up a little bit. All right, so 1/2 times 3/5, and I want to make sure that we understand that this symbol right here is the same as this. They're equal. They are both multiplication symbols. They're both multiplication symbols. They both represent the same thing. We tend to use a dot more as you get further along in math because the x gets used as a variable and it can be confusing later. So if you see a dot in a problem, it signifies that you must multiply. Okay? All right, so now let's take a look at the problem. So we look at the top factors and we look at the bottom factors. Are there any factors on the top and the bottom that share a common factor? No, in this case there are not. So we just multiply across. 3 times 1 is 3, and 2 times 5 is 10. And since it was already simplified here, we know it's simplified in its answer, and that is our final answer. All right? In the second case, we look, and we notice that 3 on the top shares a factor with a 3 on the bottom. They share a factor of 3. So we're going to divide by 3 and get 1. Divide by 3 and get 1. Now I look top to bottom. I don't see any other common factors other than the factor of 1. So we multiply. 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 4 is 4. Okay? Let's take a look at this other problem over here, number 3. So we look top to bottom, top factors and bottom factors. Notice we're not going to look sideways. 3 and 6 do share a common factor, but that does not help us here. We're looking top to bottom. And since 2 and 6 share a common factor of 2, that's what I'm going to simplify by. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now I'm looking top to bottom. I don't see any other common factors other than 1. So we multiply across. This will be 5/9. And again, since I simplified first, simplify before you multiply, I know that my final answer is simplified as well. Let's take a look at question number 4. All right, again, we're looking top to bottom. So I see that 12 and 4 share a common factor of 4. I'm going to simplify by that. If I divide 12 by 4, I get 3. If I divide 4 by 4, I get 1. Now, if I look top to bottom, I still see a common factor here. 3 and 3 share a common factor, so we can divide again. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. Now I have no other common factors top to bottom, so I simply multiply. 1 times 7 is 7, and 1 times 1 is 1. Please don't leave it as 7 over 1, because in this case, 7 over 1, remember that that fraction bar also means division. That means 7 divided by 1, and that's just 7. That's our final answer. All right, let's take a look at question number 5. Notice that in question number 5, we have a mixed number in here. And so before I can actually do any of the multiplication, I need to change that into an improper fraction. And since we just reviewed that, we know that we need to take 5 times 1, which is 5, plus 1, which is 6, and leave it over the 5. Because again, I have 6 pieces when I needed 5 to make a whole. Then we're going to multiply by 20/3. And we look top to bottom. Do we see any common factors here that would help us? We absolutely do. 3 and 6 share a factor of 3. So I'm going to divide by 3 and divide by 3. And 5 and 20 share a factor of 5. Divide by 5, divide by 5. I don't see any other common factors top to bottom. So this is going to be 8 over 1, which equals 8. And the last problem here, I need to be able to take this, and again, I need a fraction to be able to multiply. So you can make any whole number into a fraction by placing a 1 as its denominator. Because as we just learned when we did question number 4, 7 over 1 is the same thing as 7. So 2 over 1 would be the same thing as 2. Now we're going to simply multiply. I'm going to rewrite this so everything's sort of lined up a little easier. And you should notice that 2 and 6 share a common factor. Something in the top, something in the bottom. Divide by 2, I get 1. Divide by 2, I get 3. No other common factors are here, so I get 5/3. And I just want you to understand that 5/3 is a correct answer. It's a simplified fraction. Even though it's an improper fraction, doesn't make it incorrect. But it is equivalent to 1 and 2/3, because 3 goes into 5 one whole time. There's one group of 3 in there with 2 extra pieces left over. Either answer is acceptable. You need to be able to recognize both of them, because when you see an answer on a multiple choice question, you need to recognize that they are equivalent, because you never know which one you're going to see as an answer choice. All right, that's our quick review of some fraction skills that you need to be able to be successful to divide fractions. And the next video will represent how we learned how to divide fractions. Hope this was helpful.